Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Art History 368, the history of classical art, distance version. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the sort of daily life art that you would see as you're moving through the streets of an ancient city. So I've called this Domestic Decoration Part 2. That's a little bit of a misleading title because we're not spending as much time today in the structure of the house as we did last week. So the first thing that I want you to think about is that in Pompeii and in these ancient Roman cities, for many Romans, for really the majority of the population, the activities necessary to conduct daily life extended beyond the doors of the household itself, beyond the building in which they lived. So some examples of that might be public fountains. If you didn't have a water hookup directly into your house or a well or a cistern available. And if you're at Pompeii, you can find these fountains on almost every street intersection. So they're everywhere, spread throughout the city to sort of maximize the density of available public water spaces. Another example might be a public latrine. Here's an example from Ostia. It's actually from a barracks type of building. Public latrines were common in the ancient world. If you lived, again, in one of those upper apartments in an insula, you may have a chamber pot available, but you're probably not going to have the running water hookup necessary to actually have a latrine. And so here we can see each of these individual seats where you could sit side by side and enjoy making a wonderful bowel movement in good company with running water in this trench along the front and possibly a communal sponge that you could use to clean yourself. So a much more sort of public outdoors way of living, at least in this sense. That is the sort of thing that I think would maybe horrify a lot of people today. But in the Roman times, this was a completely normal social occasion to chat. Public baths here are another example, and public baths were kept artificially low priced so that more people could go, and they were a social area where one could exercise in a large open gymnasium area. You would get stripped down and leave your items in the apoditarium or changing room, and then you would have a sort of communal bathing experience. And the bathhouse is also a really lively space for commercial activities as well, not just the proprietor of the bathhouse itself, but also of various service workers who would make the bathhouse a sort of home base for their jobs. So this is a quote from a philosopher called Seneca who lived in the 1st century CE, and he wrote a letter to his friend about living above a bathhouse on one of his journeys through the cities of Rome and Campania. One of the things that I love so much about this passage is that it really gives you a sense of how lively the space would be, how noisy the space would be, and the variety of people that you might encounter coming into a place like a public bathhouse. So never forget that when you look at a Roman bathhouse, you should also remember that there is the armpit hair plucker, there are the drink and food peddlers, there are the thieves and the splashing and the bravado people. All of the sort of archetypes of people that you might think about in a modern gym are probably also in your ancient bathhouse to provide people watching opportunities in addition to the services that they are there to provide. So beyond baths, we also have public eateries, and these little sort of pop-in fast food shops, oftentimes maybe with a smaller dining area in the back, but largely arranged around counter service. These are extremely common. And it seems in many cases that the clientele of these food services were primarily people who did not have kitchen facilities in their own houses. So we are at a time where dining in your house luxuriously is more of, say, a status symbol than dining out. So it may be a little bit counterintuitive. This example of a thermopolium or a caupona of Asalina is from Pompeii. And I wanted to show it to you briefly just to give you an idea of how thoroughly exciting and decorated these places could be and full of stuff. More often than not nowadays, we just see the very skeleton of the archaeological site without sort of all of the texture that would make it a living space. But with the Thermopolium of Asalina, we have a pretty good idea of which things were discovered in this space. And there was a time when the counter was set up as a sort of old-fashioned exhibit to show off the wares of this hot food shop. One thing that I want to draw your attention to is that some of these items are quite utilitarian. We have these pretty plain jugs, for example, but then we also have this very wonderfully charactered rooster vessel, and then there's another one here that's maybe a little bit better to see in this photo that's shaped like a pig. So we have sort of little aesthetic touches that are added on to the more utilitarian character of the Thermopolium of Azzolina. So I think it's an interesting example to explore. So to kind of bring us back to this idea of dwelling outside the house, all of these places that I've been looking at are among the sites that might be necessary for an average Roman on a daily basis to visit to accomplish their daily life activities. I know I'm speaking to you at a time when our daily patterns have shifted dramatically, but I think it also sort of kind of heightens the awareness of the places that we have to go, the places that we end up being exposed to both visually and physically on a daily basis. So it becomes a sort of interesting question to think about. In the ancient Roman period, there's a really interesting sort of class difference that occurs. Move myself here so you can see this. So if we go back to our House of the Menander, this very fancy elite house that expanded out into multiple properties over time that we talked about last week, you can see that most of these amenities that I've been talking about are included within the property here. So that would enable the proprietors of this house to avoid going outside if they wish to do so. We have garden space, we have a kitchen, and also attached food shops that are probably owned by the proprietor of the House of the Menander. We have multiple latrines that are built in. And then we have a very own little miniature bath complex so that you don't even have to go out and go to the public baths with the schlubs. You can have your very own small bathing experience at home. And then you also have water access. We have a cistern here, and our latrines have downpipes, which is a signal that water is able to come down from an upper story. So we have water circulation in this house. So the House of the Menander is a very protective space. If you don't want to go outside, you don't have to. You do not have to mingle. You do not have to be exposed to the visual language of the streets. You, as a proprietor, are able to avoid these things. So if we turn even to just a slightly less luxurious household, we can see the beginning of the requirements that you start moving outside. So for example, there's a sort of a more modest townhouse and textile workshop just a couple doors down from the House of the Menander here. We can see it outlined. And we're looking at this Region 1, Insula 10, number 8, the House of Minucius. And here in the House of Minucius, we do have a latrine. We have a permanent kitchen area, and we have a cistern, so we know that there's water access. But we do not have a bath complex in the way that we do at the House of the Menander. So we know that whoever was the person living, Minucius perhaps, in the House of Minucius, they would have been required to actually walk down the street. Here is our insula, oops, behind my head. Here is our insula again here with our House of Minucius. And if you walk this way just 1, 2, 2.5 blocks, you reach the most nearby extant excavated bath complex, the Stabian Baths of Pompeii. So if you wanted to bathe daily and head to the public baths, if you were living in this small townhouse here, you would be exposed to the smells, to the street culture, to the sights and sounds of the Pompeian urban landscape for the time that you had to walk here. So, you know, there's multiple paths that you can take, but nonetheless, there's sort of a requirement that you step out of your household and into the larger world. So the question sort of for today is the art of daily life beyond the architecture of the house. How does art operate in commercial spaces, in locations of shared resources like the water fountains, and in public gathering spaces like the public baths or even the back room, small dining area of a local Caupona, a local Thermopolium, to a snack bar. And although the urban landscape is a place where people of all classes lived, we have to bear in mind that the people who are most required to be out in urban space are those with less money, with oftentimes less social status. And the more sort of social status and money that you have, the more that people will come to you, right? We talked last time about the atrium with the clients coming to visit. So you have dependents, you stay in your house, and they come to you. So a social class kind of is involved in this case with having more control over your environment in a lot of ways. So one of the things that we're going to be looking at today is the kind of art that shows up in these public spaces that the very wealthy would not necessarily be required to visit. And one of the distinctions that comes up is one of style that we will be discussing more, the plebeian versus the sort of classicizing styles in Roman art. So what I want you to do, thinking all about these things, just identify a place in your world, this should be maybe easier than ever right now, that you must go in order to fulfill essential functions of daily life. That can be a grocery store, a laundromat, a place of work, but somewhere where you lose control over your visual environment and have to be immersed in someone else's for a period of time. And that's it for now, and I will see you in part 2 of Domestic Decoration, part 2, Daily Art in Daily Life and Death, coming up momentarily. Thank you very much.